Well, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think in general, of course, as you're well aware, there has been this sort of downturn in overall EV sales in Europe, and in the U.S. too, of course. And so I think that's it's going to be interesting to see how these tariffs fall on the consumer, because they're falling in different levels for different companies. As you pointed out, the SAIC and its brand MG are hit with a fairly high tariff. That's 38% on top of the 10% tariff that already exists. But some of the other companies like BYD, they're going to be offering somewhat cheaper EVs, have a much less level of tariffs, around 70% for BYD. So I think it's if I was a consumer, I would definitely be concerned about this if I was looking at something like BMG. The question is, are there alternatives? People who are intent on buying EVs are probably going to be looking, more broadly at the offerings in Europe. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out at the consumer level. But already, of course, there's been a slowdown depending on the country in terms of EV uptake.
And the other angle to the story is, Paul, as Sylvia highlighted, is the differential tariffs. Of course, that's got to do with the size and the demand of each of these companies. Do you see this, because these are provisional tariffs, and provisional is the operative term out here. Do you see some sort of breakthrough in terms of China coming to the table and saying, hold on, we'll work something out?
Well, as you saw with the comments from Dombrovskis, the companies like Tesla are definitely gonna push for some level of reduction and cooperate with the investigation. I mean, it's a complicated mix here. You have really three different buckets of EVs that are originating in China. You have Tesla, which has for a long time been shipping in, for example, its Model 3. It's making the Model Y in Berlin, and then you have EU automakers that are making these EVs in China and shipping them back to the EU. And then you have the Chinese companies like BYD that are starting to make inroads in terms of exports into Europe. So it's a complicated mix here. And of course, you've also got German automakers, the big players like BMW, Porsche, and Audi, and others that are shipping a lot of cars into China. So China has threatened potentially a retaliatory tariff here of potentially of 25% on cars with ICE engines of a certain size. And so I think we're going to have to wait and see over the next couple of days how China reacts. China has also threatened to look at tariffs on agricultural goods and other areas. And so I think the danger is getting into sort of a tit-for-tat tariff battle here. Nobody seems to want this. The German automakers in particular don't want this. And so there's going to be a lot of pushback here, and the Commission will probably show some flexibility, as they did in making this decision. Remember, the U.S. just slapped 100% tariffs on EVs, a couple of weeks ago, but the EU is trying to draw, some distinction between the companies in China and what sort of subsidies they've received, and draw sort of a different, come up with a different conclusion for each company. And so that process is going to play out over the next couple of months. But I think that the key here will be how China reacts to this, and then also how the EU reacts to some of these requests for companies like Tesla to reconsider the tariffs.